What's going on, everyone? So today we have some of the sweetest cards I have seen yet from the new set. I talked about how I think Echo is one of the most powerful cards from the new set. I've talked about how I think Rose Tico's got some really nice potential. But today we got a brand new 4-resource deploy leader and his ship, as well as a few other cards to talk about that I think are the most broken cards from the new set so far, at least in my opinion. You're welcome to disagree or talk about why I'm wrong, but at least let's talk about what the cards are before we talk about any of that, right? If you want to pick up these cards when they release in July, be sure to use my TCG player link in the description down below. It does help me out and it helps yourself out. Without further ado, guys, he's right on the screen. Kylo Ren. He is a 4 to deploy aggression villainy leader with an action to discard a card from your hand, give a unit +2/+0 for this phase. He is a force and a first order tagged unit. Now, the first thing before we talk about his flip side, the action. A lot of people are like, is this worth it? You're discarding a card, you're only getting +2/+0. If you think about kind of what this card or what this action kind of does, it's almost like half of for a cause. So yes, you have to discard a card, but people are already playing for a cause. And for a cause, yes, it's twice as much damage, generally speaking. But there are also times when you're playing those heroism aggression decks and you have cards in your hand that you actually can't use by the end of the game. That's not always the case, but for a cause is already super strong. And this is like a free half of a for a cause if you're able to get in that damage. I don't think this is really useful as a way to trade up with enemy units, because if you're doing that, then you're probably going to run out of gas, run out of cards in hand to actually close out the game, and then you're going to fizzle out. But kind of thinking of this as a way to get a lot of value in terms of just getting in a ton of damage early is the way to go. The backside also kind of reinforces this idea of trying to get in some early aggression, as he is a 4 to deploy 5/4 that gets -1/-0 for each card in your hand. So the idea behind this is that you want to get rid of your hand in order for you to get in a lot of damage. Now, there are definitely some good things about this and some bad things about this. First off, let's talk about the really big concerns that not only myself, but a lot of people have mentioned. It dies to basically everything. Open fire kills it. Force choke kills it, takedown kills it, Fell the Dragon kills it. All of these cards, I believe Fell the Dragon kills it, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, every removal spell in the game kills Kylo Ren, just like everything kills IG-88. And it's one of the reasons why IG-88 is one of the harder decks to get to work, because his leader just dies to everything. Here's the difference between the two. This one comes down a turn early. And so if your opponent's sitting on a removal spell and waiting for you to deploy this leader and they're just passing, let's say you are in a position where you have a 2-drop out, maybe you have a 3-drop, maybe you have multiple 1-drops out because you want to get rid of cards in your hand. Maybe you've already discarded a couple cards, and you have like a Death Star Stormtrooper plus, whatever 1-drop else that we have, and maybe even the new card that we're going to talk about in just a moment. Maybe even the cunning 2/3 space unit that I forgot the name of off the top of my head that's new in this set. Maybe you've deployed a couple of 1-drops. If your opponent just tries to pass through the turn to try to kill off your Kylo Ren when he comes down, then you can just take initiative after attacking with all your units. So they can't really wait until your Kylo Ren comes down, because you probably already have multiple units on the battlefield getting a lot of value. And that being the case, you're probably going to get in at least 5 points of damage with Kylo Ren, and then maybe they remove him the following turn. But they've had to use resources for that. And so this really does work well against those extremely, extremely gruesome, removal spells. There's a chance that this could be a 4/4 when it comes down, which is, only 4 points of damage. But I think there's a good chance, especially with how many 1-resource plays we're getting in the next set, that this can come down as a 5/4 on turn 3. Now you compare it not just against the more controlling decks with the removal spells that a lot of people mention, but compare it against the aggro decks that we're fighting. Sabine Wren, right? That's the quintessential aggro deck. Well, now your Kylo Ren comes down and can just kill their Sabine Wren, or just hits their base for 2 additional points of damage. That is really powerful. I don't think this is going to be like the end all be all of like the most amazing card in the game, especially since the action is a pretty big downside, right? However, and this is where this card gets really exciting because we got a ship today released as well. And when you look at this ship, this card suddenly becomes not necessarily a downside, or this action doesn't necessarily become a huge downside, but actually a massive upside. So while I want to continue about talking about Kylo Ren, we actually have to talk about his ship, his TIE Silencer. It is a 2-resource aggression villainy space unit, 3/2. It's one of the only, in fact, as I'm saying this, the only 3-powered 2-resource space unit, with the exception of like A-Wing, which gets raid 2, right? But the only 3-powered space unit that we have in the game currently, on turn 1, I think. But its action: if this unit was discarded from your hand or deck this phase, play it from your discard pile. That is absurd. That is absolutely absurd. This is not actually a turn 1 play, generally, if you want to get value out of Kylo Ren's ability. What the idea here is, you play a couple of 1-resource plays. Let's say you play a Death Star Stormtrooper. Maybe you're in cunning, you play a Greedo. So you have Greedo and Death Star Stormtrooper down. You go to the next turn, or you go to the next round, and your opponent, maybe they play a unit. And then you go, discard Kylo's TIE Silencer, give +2/+0 to my Death Star Stormtrooper, attack for 5, attack for 3, action TIE Silencer into the battlefield, and suddenly the action got you 2 damage and still didn't really get you that big of a downside. So it's just straight up 2 plus 2 damage to your opponent's base, which is just absolutely crazy. So this card really starts to get me very excited about a Kylo Ren leader, as well. Yes, his flip side, I know people are making fun of me when I say backside. I get it. I think it's funny too. But the flip side of Kylo Ren is a 5/4 or 4/4. And yes, it dies to a lot of things. But you just have to think about it in the context of running an extremely aggressive shell, similar to IG, but with a better payoff in Kylo Ren, and able to pump in a lot of initial damage, which is really, really important. Now, this is one of our first legendaries that we've seen. We also saw the finalizer the other day, but this is extremely powerful. There's also a few other cards that I want to talk about, but this is by far the most exciting card alongside Kylo Ren that I've seen from the new set. And it makes sense as it's one of our first legendaries, but Kylo Ren just seems absolutely absurd in the aggressive shell that I'm kind of thinking about. Again, using those really cheap units that we're getting that maybe have bounties attached to them. Heck, you could, as I mentioned, drop them in an aggression cunning lineup where you have like Dr. Evaz on, and you're leveraging the 3/3 that you get early on that has shield, and you're leveraging the 2/3 in space, and you're leveraging all these extremely powerful tricks to get in early damage, sneak attack even. Things like this, where you're just trying to get in as much damage early on. The only question I have about this is the fact, how are we going to close out the game? And this is where the new set also gets a little bit more exciting, because while I talked about, the silencer and some things you could do to kind of mitigate the downside or kind of leverage the additional power and leverage the early deploy of Kylo Ren, we also have smuggle. And this is where the discard your cards from hand doesn't really matter as much as well, because you actually have kind of a secondary hand in your resource pile, which can be really, really powerful. On top of that, can we get some form of reach? And that's something that's also pretty important. One of the reasons why the heroism aggression deck really performs super solidly at the top level meta with both Sabine yellow, Leia red, Sabine green is because of K2SO for a cause. These two cards are the key linchpin pieces in order for you to close out games by just hitting your opponent in the face with direct damage. If we get some more forms of that in the villainy side of things, I could see Kylo Ren being an absolute tier 1 meta leader and just absolutely dominating the field in one of the most powerful aggression decks that we've seen, or not necessarily aggression decks, but powerful aggro decks that we've seen so far. But that's not all. There's a few other cards that I did want to talk about today, as we did get a couple of other good ones. The next one is the Rickety Quadjumper. This is a 2-resource space unit, 1/3. On attack, you may reveal the top card of your deck. If it's not a unit, give an experience token to another unit, and then you leave the top card of your deck on top. This card, I think it's pretty cool. I actually don't think it's very good. The idea behind this is that it's going to work decently well in your upgrade themed decks, but the way these decks kind of want to work is, or this card wants to work, is you want enough units so that you have multiple units on the battlefield in order for you to get the experience token, but then you also want enough non-units in order for you to trigger this ability. And so at best, I could see this being like a 50-50, you get an experience token, but that's also like, are you going to have another unit that you can give that experience token to when it comes down? I could see this, playing on turn 1, hitting in for 1, getting an experience token on like your whatever 3-drop that you play, and getting a little bit of value there. But is that really worth it? Because you've played a 1/3, which is like pretty mediocre. If this was able to give it an experience token to itself, I could see this being pretty powerful, but I'm not huge on this card. I think it's a lot to set up and not a huge payoff. On the other hand, we got a couple other really sweet ones yesterday in Gray Squadron Y-Wing to start us off here. A 2-resource heroism space unit, 1/3 again, but on attack, an opponent chooses a unit or base they control, you may deal 2 damage to it. So obviously this is a 1/3, so you kind of have to keep that in mind. It's not like an A-Wing where you get to choose to attack for 3 to whatever you want. Your opponent gets a choice. So already I'm like, okay, this isn't as good as an A-Wing. That's what I'll initially say. However, it can do what A-Wing is trying to do in a lot of scenarios. Let's say your opponent doesn't have a unit. Well, you deal 3 damage to their base. And so it's another 3 damaging space unit on turn 1. However, you have the downside to where, let's say you want to attack an opponent's unit. Let's say they play an A-Wing of their own, and you play the Y-Wing, and you're like, I attack your A-Wing. Well, your opponent can just choose to deal the 2 damage to their base, rather than, taking it on their A-Wing, and then you don't get to kill their A-Wing, and then they get to kill your Y-Wing. So your Y-Wing kind of got in for 2 damage to their base, and then 2 damage to your opponent's Y-Wing, as they'll attack back into your Y-Wing. That's not that great. So in situations where they have any sort of space relevance, Y-Wing looks pretty bad. If you're in the space and they decide, I can take a couple damage here on my ground units, that doesn't look too bad. But overall, I don't know if this card is going to be extremely powerful. I'm a little bit skeptical, as again, since this is a 1/3, it's a lot of situational, can I get extra damage to their base, or can I leverage this extra little damage that we're getting from on attacks? I would much have preferred if this was a 2/3 with 1 damage to whatever they have. That is a lot more exciting, because at least you get kind of like an upgraded X-Wing before you're like, oh, wasn't that just power creep? Yeah, well, we already have cards that are just straight up better than other cards. Heck, we have like, things like the X-Wing already, and then we're sitting on a lot of other different options in space that are just straight up better. So I guess this is one of those situations where we'll have to see how it plays out, but I'm not super excited about it. But we did get another card in Palpatine's Return. Oh, somehow he returned. We have a 6-resource event. Command Villainy. Play a unit from your discard pile. It costs 6 less. If it's a Force unit, it costs 8 less instead. That is really, really powerful. Of course, you need some way to actually go ahead and get that discount. Because if you're just playing a Force unit or a unit from your discard pile and it costs 6 less, it's not actually that exciting, right? You would have had to play out a unit, have it get killed, or have it get milled or something like that, and then you just replay it. And that's like whatever, right? Because you've already would have had 6 resources, so you're essentially not using all your resources at this point, which isn't that great. However, if you're playing this on turn 5 and you're recovering like an Emperor Palpatine, for example, which is I think why they put the specific costs here, that could be really, really powerful. You might think, what happens if you run like a Kylo Ren command deck and you're leveraging this discard theme and you're trying to Palpatine's Return back like a Palpatine or a Vader or something like that? That could be pretty powerful. I did mention, you need the discount, but there are like some units that you want to revive, you could say, that maybe cost 7, not necessarily 8. It's still giving you the discount, but things like Darth Vader, for example, that one looks really powerful as a way to return, or as a way to get more copies of Darth Vader in your deck, as that's one of the most powerful cards in the entirety of Star Wars Unlimited, and now you get a little bit of a resource reduction on it. So pretty interesting there. I'm not 100% sure if it would fit in the Kylo Ren theme, as you know, you do want to discard cards to get low on hand size, so having a 6th resource play doesn't look that great. But remember, the way Star Wars Unlimited works is you can resource things at any point. And so this, if you wanted to play Palpatine's Return, kind of wants you to play both expensive Force units and Palpatine's Return. The question is, are you going to be able to leverage the fact that if you play it on a Kylo Ren deck, you're going to be able to either discard these cards to pump your early game units, or maybe are you going to flood out with all these expensive units that you put in your deck to try to make Palpatine's Return work? Like, if you're playing this, I don't imagine you want to play 3 copies of this and like 3 copies of Vader. Like, that's not enough. My guess would be you want 3 copies of Palpatine's Return, maybe like a total of 5 to 6 copies of one of those more expensive Force units. And mainly for the reason being is you don't want to have the situation where you're drawing Palpatine's Return but never drawing your other units. Having those extra high costed Force units kind of make it so that when you do have Palpatine's Return, there's a high chance that you'll have one of those expensive units. And if you're doing that, you have 7 to 9 cards in your deck. That looks pretty mediocre at most stages of the game. I guess it gives you a little bit of a later game, but you don't really want to try to shore up your late game in an aggro deck, generally speaking, unless you're talking about sideboarding. I don't know. It kind of is sweet in the Kylo Ren deck because of the whole discarding mechanics and synergies there, but I'm not 100% sure that that card's going to be that exciting. But this is a huge day for spoilers. We're gonna get even more, you know, stuff going on and cards coming for the next few days. But oh man, I had to talk about Kylo Ren because this guy just looks absolutely sweet, and I, even though I'm not a huge fan of Kylo Ren, cannot wait to get my hands on a Kylo Ren and just dive in and try to mess around with this guy because, ooh, this one looks absolutely sweet. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Am I, you know, overhyping? Do you think I'm exaggerating? Do you think I am trolling? There are other options with Kylo Ren. You know, I haven't talked about everything that we could do with this card. You know, something like try to empty out most of your hand and then play like a fallen lightsaber on Kylo as your last card to pump him up so he doesn't die to things like takedown or open fire. You could do things like using his own lightsaber, which I imagine we're going to get this set like Vader's lightsaber and Luke's lightsaber. It's very possible we're going to get Kylo Ren's lightsaber, something like that. So I don't know. There are a lot of different options to pump him up, different options to get advantage out of him. But I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.